Hello, good evening, and welcome to the National Parents Union presents Speak Your Truth with yours truly, Vivette Dukes. How is everybody doing this evening? I'm hoping that all is well. Um, how am I doing? Let me see. Let me do like a little check-in before I just jump right into the topic. Long day of teaching. So teaching is becoming increasingly just different, really, really challenging and nuanced. Um, Definitely during the pandemic. And so, one of the things that I bring to the National Parents Union from Speak Your Truth, um, besides the topic that we're talking about tonight, which is really that intersection of education and incarceration, which seem like they should be diametrically opposed, but in actually they're very much intertwined and feed off of each other, or one directly feeds the other, is this intersectionality of being both a parent and an educator. And so, I just start off tonight telling you that in that dual role, I am able to see things from multiple perspectives. And it is just really so nuanced. That's like my word of the day. So many intricacies surrounding the parenting piece and the teaching piece and the students and the pandemic and reimagining education. And we're watching what's going on. We're looking at, what's going on in Chicago public schools, what will take place there. Tanisha, shout out to you, Tanisha Peoples. If you're listening, you're like my Chicago link, my Chi-Town link. How is that going to affect the teachers, the parents, and the students in the third largest school district in our nation? And tonight, I want us to really focus and hone in on the school to prison pipeline. I invite you in the comments, if you know anything about the school to prison pipeline, to please drop them in the comments. And if you know someone who this topic is of interest to them, please invite them to log on. I don't often say this, I'm not self-promoting, but this topic is one that is deeply impacting our community, our Black boys. For those of you who may not know, I spent 4 years of my teaching career in a school erected specifically to address and to disrupt and to dismantle the school to prison pipeline that is fed with the lives of our Black boys and girls. And it was in that role as a teacher in that school. Shout out to the Eagle Academy for Young Men of Southeast Queens, one of the best teaching experiences of my career. In that role, I learned about the communities within New York and New Jersey. There are 7 neighborhoods within New York State and New Jersey that feed, not even New York State, I stand corrected, within the 5 boroughs of New York City and New Jersey that directly feed all of the prisons within New York State. Those communities are Brownsville, Brooklyn, East New York, Brooklyn, South Jamaica, Queens. We have Harlem, New York. In New Jersey, there is Newark. Okay, I'm missing 2 other neighborhoods, but when you think about this, all of the New York State prisons are being fed by these 7 neighborhoods. So we have entire communities that have been stripped of fathers, uncles, grandfathers, brothers. This is a serious issue. So just giving you some background about where I come from and why this is such an especially important topic to me. On top of that, Speak Your Truth was born. I'm the co-founder of it with my husband, John, and it was born while he was incarcerated. And as I sat there with him in that visiting room of the correctional facility, and we talked and we conceptualized speak your truth. I've had the opportunity to speak with so many men who have been incarcerated, who are currently incarcerated, or returning citizens who did 10, 20, 30, 40 years of time. And one commonality, a common thread that I'm finding in all of their studies, doing my own informal ethnographic research, is that somewhere along, either they were involved in special education programs, somewhere along the line they had negative interactions with teachers who put them down, tried to stifle their spirits. Many said, nah, school just wasn't my thing. Why isn't school the thing for our Black boys? And don't tell me it's our Black boys. That's what you're not going to do. Because, see, I work with our Black boys, so I'm going to tell you about them. They're beautiful. They're bright. They're full of light. They're full of creativity. But the very things that are part of that creativity and their just intrinsic value that they bring to the human race is not seen as something with merit. Instead, it is seen as a distraction and a disruption and a problem. So when they're making beats on their desks, that's their way. That's that drumming. That's the African heartbeat. Now, if you're not tuned into that, that's a problem. Am I saying they need to be beating on their desk all the time? And did Miss Dukes not have to pull them up one or two times? Absolutely. But to constantly be bothered by the ways and norms and mores of your students, that is a problem. And what happens is, because of that annoyance and the lack of understanding of their students' cultures, teachers are directly feeding the school to prison pipeline with our Black boys' bodies. This is my knowledge of this topic, lived experience, as well as book knowledge about this topic. But tonight we have a guest who's going to talk to us about the school to prison pipeline, looking at it from the other side of the country in California. Because I'm seeing something here in New York. But what's going on in California? Is this pipeline just something that's happening in New York? We know mass incarceration is happening globally, and New York State incarcerates more bodies per capita, more Black and brown bodies per capita than any other nation in the country. You don't believe me? Look it up. I'm not making it up. This is really a crucial topic. And it's one that, if you are an educator, I'm going to need you to be tuned in, keyed in, please and thank you. If you are a parent, you need to be cued in. If you are especially a parent of a Black boy, this is for you, whether you're catching this live or on the replay. In any way, shape, or form, if you interact with or have influence over the lives of Black boys, it is imperative that you partake of this conversation and don't leave it here. Go out, get activated, and go out. And let's start making a change. With that being said, I'd like to take a moment to introduce to you our esteemed guest tonight, which, forgive me, I misspelled her name in the introduction. I apologize. Her name is Christina Laster, not Christine. I apologize for that oversight. Christina Laster is actually a colleague of mine. I had the pleasure of meeting her just about a year ago in New Orleans at the National Parents Union's inaugural convening. At that time, I was very impressed by Christina. She knew how to work the room. And she's very knowledgeable. Everything she said, she tied it in with stats and numbers and data and policy and legislation. I thought she was a lawyer when I first met her. And I attended one of her policy sessions, And in hearing about her own life and her own walk as an advocate, she is a staunch advocate for Black and Brown children in her state. She puts on for her city, that's for sure. Christina is no joke. I'm briefly from her bio. She says, I am deeply committed to children, families, and committees. My passion is equipping parents, families, and community leaders to become more fortified in their establishment of foundational, generational, adequate progress and lasting change. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I welcome to our broadcast Christina Laster.
Gives me peace of mind. Hello. Can you hear me, sis?
Yeah, just fine.
Okay, because I have I hear something in my background that I'm trying to fix real quick, and I'm sorry. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I'm trying to make it stop. I'm just glad to be here. Really, can you hear that in the background? It's not in the background. Okay, let me stop it. Okay, sorry about that. I figured out what it was, and I was like, oh my God, not right now. Hello, everybody. My name's Christina Laster, and I'm just glad to be here. First and foremost, I'm a parent, a mother of 4. 2 are adults, thank God, but still there's still parenting that takes place, but in a different way with our adult children. And then I have 2 children that are still developing and growing. And so I'm just glad. I'm an excited grandmother of 3. And so I get to watch these generations, which is a blessing, right? Like, I feel so blessed to have been able to raise a generation of children, and then have my grandchildren growing up before my eyes. And so I'm just excited all the time to make those announcements. Outside of that, I'm a civil rights activist and humanitarian and the director of policy and legislation with National Parents Union. So glad to be here. And thank you just for having me. It's my passionate pursuit. Okay. My zealous and passionate pursuit to make sure our children do better than we did. Okay. And do better than the last generation. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for your expertise. I have the privilege of sitting in many meetings with you, and Christina, I am just in awe of how you have made it your life's purpose to not only gain knowledge, but share the knowledge and help others advocate for themselves and for their children. Parents often don't have the proper eyes and ears or avenues into our schools to fully allow them or engage them in ways that are meaningful, to engage them in ways that feel like we're all in this together. I'd like for you to talk to us tonight, first and foremost, about your experience as a mama bear, mother, grandmother, in dealing with the school system with the knowledge base that you have.
So a lot of my work has really been in the area of civil rights. People that don't understand really what are civil rights, right? We think about that. Civil rights are our supposed equal protections under the law from discrimination and protection from bad treatment, protection from, where you have that preferential treatment, that's discrimination, right? Based on, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, whatever that may be. And really what I call civil rights is a way that human rights and natural rights are codified to say, why can't America be America for all of its citizens? Okay. You have these parallel lanes in like this tale of 2 cities and this tale of 2 lifestyles, right? Where America is America for some of its citizens, but it has to be codified and forced to be America for the other citizens. And so that's the way that I like to really break down civil rights. When we're looking at the civil rights in education, right? We're looking at the protections that our children have, and I'm not just talking about, that basic, adequate, or minimum requirement that the states typically have in their constitutions to say, yeah, we're going to make sure that children receive education, but how are you not discriminating against our kids? And how is this, am I glitching?
A little bit, but you're fine. Go. I'm fine.
I'm sorry, because I had Spectrum out here, y'all. Y'all need to call and advocate for my internet because something ain't right. I had Spectrum out here 2 days in a row. Let me try to turn my camera off and turn it back on.
No problem. Spectrum, if you're out there, we're coming for you. Any Spectrum apps, reps, we need you to get over to Christina's home right away. Please and thank you.
Okay, how about that? Is that okay?
Yes,
can you?
Fine.
Okay, I'm sorry, you guys. I hate when I'm glitching, and I can kind of tell. And so what we're saying is that we want our children to have equal protection under the law with regards to their education, with regards to education spending, right? We see that there has been, that overarching story since forced integration of trying to fight for equitable allocation of resources, right? What does that look like? What does that look like when there's zip codes that create de jure de facto segregation, right? Even though it's supposed to be against the law. What does it look like when our children are stuck in cyclical, repetitive, generational failure because they can't get a quality education outside of where they live, and their parents are forced to accept things that across the tracks would not be so, right? What does it look like to be maneuvered into segregative communities where you are lacking the resources and lacking the quality and being governed in such a way that you're being told what type of education you can have and what type of performance levels and measures of outcome they're basically fed that way to us, right? And so we're looking at that as discrimination against our rights, civil rights, and against our children's civil rights. When is America going to be America for all of its citizens? Okay, particularly with this area of punishment, harsh, excessive punishment. What I find is that there is something outside of what we typically define as racism. What I find is a level of anti-Blackness that has not been addressed in this country.
I want you to stop right there. This is an educational session. This is a different kind of broadcast tonight. So I'm going to invite all viewers. I'll be putting things in. I'll be dropping links in the chat so that you have resources available to you. Christina Laster has been kind enough to do some research, share some links prior to coming on that I want to in turn share with all of you. So as she's speaking, listen to these terms: anti-Blackness, civil rights, are human rights. These are phrases or things you need to start to learn if you don't already know them, and start to now let's start qualifying and quantifying this so that when we are fighting against this demon, we have the tools we need, because that's what it is. Our Black children, and I'm seeing it, I've seen it firsthand, are being slowly but surely destroyed in a system that is being paid to educate them. This, my friends, is a serious problem. Continue.
Right. And so I always like to talk about, discrimination. Yes, it takes place. Racism, yes, it takes place. But the most extreme form of racism is that anti-Blackness and that, opposition to what we know as Native people in this country. And why does that take place? Because those two original sins of Native eugenicide and Black African slavery have not been addressed politically, legislatively, ain't enough collective bargaining gonna end your anti-blackness. Okay, I'm just gonna say that right there, right? But as education realms, just like any other type of realm, if you have a union, you as members need to be addressing your organizations, your unions, and saying, how are we using our political and financial capital to end the anti-Black practices that are codified all over this nation, right? What are we doing to say we do support Black lives and Black minds, right? How are we doing that in such a way that we're not upholding the system and the structure of racism and particularly anti-Blackness, right? We see these numbers and they are so disparate that they ought to be criminal, okay? I'm just gonna say that, and they can't happen in and of themselves. There are people that are complicit in upholding these structures because it economically benefits them. Okay, we're going to talk about how San Diego did that. Definitely, especially since at the height of our civil rights leader Martin Luther King Day, there was an announcement that Cindy Martin, the superintendent of San Diego, was nominated to be Deputy Secretary of Education. That ought not be.
Talk to us about that. Why ought that not be, for those of us who are not familiar with Cindy Martin?
Under Cindy Martin's leadership, under her regime, more Black children suffered than any other children. Second, okay, special education students suffered, okay? And there's mass amounts of civil rights violations we're talking about against disabled students. We're talking about based on race and nationality. We're even talking about with socioeconomic factors, because there are people that live south of the 8 highway in San Diego that are living in a perpetual low socioeconomic communities that are maneuvered into poverty and maneuvered into suffering and maneuvered into pain because of that anti-Blackness, right? And these are the children that suffered the most. And they got receipts, okay? There was elaborate things that took place under her leadership to silence them. Investigations halted, right? The State Department of Education has the information, documentation. I've personally filed with the Office of Civil Rights, the U.S. Department of Education. You mean to tell me they didn't check her background on civil rights claims and complaints? We're not accepting favors, okay? People getting positions because of political favors. Vet them, okay? And the pain and the suffering even goes further when we talk about the layer after in levels of sexual assaults that took place on children on school campuses that were covered up.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And so if you do a simple name search with regards to Cindy Martin, you couldn't miss this.
I did one. I'm citing my source now. This is from the Los Angeles Times 3 days ago. In the 2018-2019 school year, Black students in San Diego Unified School District were suspended more than 3 times as often as white students, and they accounted for, catch this, 18% of students suspended despite making up 8% of the student body. The suspension rate for Black students that year was unchanged from 2013 when Martin took the helm. So for the past 2013 to 2021, 8 years, there's been no change. That means no improvement. That means she's done nothing to help mitigate this at all. But she's been promoted. How many of us can have no changes on our jobs and our roles, possibly even have demotions, but yet still get elevated to state level, national level positions. It doesn't make sense on any planet. Why is this happening? We have to ask these questions, but we can't stop at asking. We must seek answers.
And it leads into that conversation of anti-Blackness. Who is economically benefiting off of our exploitation, off of our suffering and oppression, right? Obviously, there is some economic benefit off of that, and it's being openly rewarded. Everybody ought to be outraged. Everybody ought to be outraged.
Benefit, Christina. What is the economic benefit? Break that down.
Holding systems and structures that are financial helms in the society, right? And that also have the ability to govern Black bodies, right? We're talking about social services. We're talking about public schooling. We're talking about even policing. That is particularly was created to govern Black bodies, to govern Black bodies to the point where, we have so much room to move. Right, we have so much movement forward, right? Because when we get so far, it's like, wait, we got to push back, because we don't want the inundation of the workforce. We don't want, this area, being taken over. So we're going to control the entry and the exit of Black bodies, okay? And then having that constitutional ability to say that Black children and Black people have committed what I would call nothing crimes, vagrancy laws, right? You spit it on the corner. You looked at me the wrong way. And you get to attach a penal code and a criminal justice system behind that. Right? That's, again, another way of governing and managing the Black bodies that exist in this nation.
Christina, what can anyone listening out there do, and how can we fight back against this? So we're hearing this, we're reading the articles. What types of strategies can parent groups employ in order to push back against the school to prison pipeline? When as a mother, I'll speak about my own situation. When I saw my Black son, brilliant, bright boy, graduate now of Howard University, HBCU, send your children there. It's an excellent school. But when I saw him in all of his brilliance, being targeted, any little thing he said was like, you have something to say about everything.
Right.
When I went up to the school in my Jordan and my hoodies, not, looking the part either, I saw the level of disrespect given to me as a parent. And disrespect comes in many forms, being overlooked. So sitting there for 20 minutes and no one talking to you. That's acceptable. But meanwhile, other parents, white parents, I'm just going to say it, were walking in and out and getting served. What do parents do when they have to advocate for their children but don't necessarily know how to, specifically where the school to prison pipeline is concerned? Because they may be just hearing stuff. I find parents are hearing their child's version, and by the time they get called into it, it's like too late. Well, they're getting suspended, detention, superintendent's suspension. Sometimes kids are out of school 60, 90, 120 days. That's the whole school year.
Right. And so we need to, first of all, I want to say to parents, believe your child. Okay. Believe them. If they tell you something happened at the hands of a teacher, or something in class, it may even sound preposterous, believe them. Because I have watched as children have been violated in some kind of way that it kind of builds up. It looks real different in kindergarten than it would in third grade, right? And it starts to build up. And then what happens by fifth grade, you got children chewing their nails off and pulling their hair out. or they have these physical manifestations of illnesses like upset stomachs or sleeping straight after school or way before school and just dreading like, oh my God, I just rather be asleep, right? You at that point have to be sensitive and understand that they're experiencing something that ought not happen to them with regards to their humanity. They're experiencing something that, you know, is wrong. So that's the first step. When your child tells you something, believe it. Okay. Then what you're going to do is really question the policies, right? What types of policies are in on the school board? Do they have policies that are attached to penal codes? In the criminal justice system, I saw a civility policy that was all over school board policies in California that said if parents talk too loudly and were thought to be aggressors, they could get a misdemeanor. Well, wait, where is your vocal tone metric? I want to know. Are you talking about library voice, inside voice, or cultures that typically talk loud, right? And so they gave basically this power of penalty to the hand of everyday people that were not trained around law, that were not trained around, you know, the legislative piece of criminal justice, and said, if you deem that this parent is aggressive in their communications with you, you could sign this, write the date and time it happened, and the superintendent of the school could decide to turn it over to the DA. Are you kidding me? Right? And so watch that type of language in policies that are attached to criminal codes. Watch it and ask for it. Public records requested. Do what you have to do to get that, right? Ask for the boards to formally resolve zero tolerance practices and instead to institute multi-tier systems of support.
And restorative practices.
Restorative practices, right? Some, you know, PBIS even is better than zero tolerance practices. You want to eradicate and abolish zero tolerance practices, right? And you
want to deal with the humanity of that child, because every child deserves dignity. There's federal legislation. There's the DACA, okay, DASA, excuse me, right? The Dignity for All Students Act. So we really, like, those are legislative pieces on the federal level that govern schools nationally.
Right. Christy, I see your question. How do we join the fight against this woman, Cindy Martin? You and all of the parents out there can write to your congressional, senatorial delegate, you know, of your state, and write to the president and the his team of the United States and state specifically, we oppose the nomination. And you need to do this as you're watching. They're making decisions as we speak, right? We oppose the nomination of Cindy Martin, and we demand an investigation and accountability into her discriminatory practices. She should not be having a job in any space in the United States that's working with children. And I mean, I'm thinking about the 8 million Black children across this nation and the 10 million brown children across this nation. That's a lot of kids to be directing your evil, wicked practices. I'm gonna call it that because we're talking about children. They're still developing, right? Write to your state delegates and say that you want them to oppose her nomination. I don't care if you guys want to pick up the phone and do whatever that looks like in your area, but whatever resources you have in parent capital, raise it to the forefront, bring it, and tell them, no, we don't want her nowhere near education. As a matter of fact, there's some unresolved matters in her own state, okay, regarding civil rights violations and complaints that need to be externally investigated. Because obviously the people that are sitting here for the 7 or 8 years seeing the data, it's innate, the gaps is innate, the data is in the California Department of Education, the records of the are in the Office of Administrative Hearings, it's not like this information isn't documented. So how many people did it take to uphold that, right? To uphold that, and were people just silent because it's just everyday Black folks, right? Or was it because our children they don't look at us deem as human, so you can just treat them anyway? Okay. I see another question that I really want to answer as well.
Yes.
From Patricia saying that, do you think the teacher, police, and correctional officers union might have anything to do with this? Of course. There is some investment through unions into the prison industrial complex. You need to research that, right?
The federal law that was just, excuse me, Christina, was this the federal law that President Biden recently rescinded? Did he sign an executive order stopping business and stopping the funding of the prison industrial complex, or is it more?
It's going to be more intense than that. And so unions are going to have to do more than just put it in paper saying, oh, we have a resolution that we're going to take a hard look at ourselves, which I did see that Randy, AFT did in 2016, like, oh, we realize that we have a problem within the labor movement, right? And we need to take a hard look at ourselves and really, how can we change? But if they're not using their political capital and their basic powers, political power and structure and efforts to get policy changes where they belong, and then to call out the police unions and other unions that are practicing, these types of things, then they're really just writing. You can hold a sign all day. You can collective bargain and negotiate all day. But if it ain't against this, it's not helping, right? It's just symbolic. Okay. And so we got to look at the way that a lot of unions are fighting for that economic justice, but that's parallel and separate from what we're saying about our civil rights being violated. And why are you in a whole nother movement? You need to make a decision. Right. And I think members have the power to say we don't have to accept these top down decisions because this is a member paid type of situation here. We're not going to be told what to do. We're going to tell you guys what to do because we're paying these dues, right? And so there are so many things that can be done, but until we really start attacking this from the ground up and the top down, it's just going to continue to prevail. And it's going to be a challenge. I'm going to tell you that. There's, all types of restrictive ordinances and policies that still exist, even in the housing realm, banking. It's a lot, but we have to be willing to say enough and not be continuing to be silent, especially when it comes to children being maneuvered into the penal system, into the criminal justice system. And we're talking about particularly Black people. That is discrimination. That is blatant. I don't want to hear anything about the war on whatever. That really is code word for pick up Black folks. Okay.
What are some things parents should be looking for if they have concerns about their child really being ushered into the school to prison pipeline? First of all, can we talk about what the school to prison pipeline is? You and I are using this language, but some parents might not even be familiar with what that is, first and foremost. And once they know what it is, what does it look like? What should they be looking for?
So I like to talk about the U.S. system of education has certain pathways, right? And those pathways look like K-12 education. And then you can go on to get a vocational or, certificate, or you can go to four-year university and then move up into where we have like 2-year university, 4-year university, master's, and then doctorate, and above, right? And so you see these education pathways. And then really our children instead of having that opportunity, they start to become targeted, and their files start to become padded with penal or criminal justice type of talk. And I'll give some specific examples that paint them as a criminal, right? And then by the time they're in middle school or high school, they're in some kind of juvenile program or recommendation with law enforcement. And then by the time they're adults, it's full blown, like, targeted for prison, because you have this history and this background and this pathway of criminal behavior, right? And so I've seen it as young as first graders, kindergartners, where they'll give the Black boys, even the girls, a plan of 3 strikes and you're out. Well, wait a minute, that's attached to penal codes, right? In criminal justice talk. Like, are you an educator, or are you working with the penal system? Like, why are we utilizing this terminology in these types of practices when everyone else gets more than 3 shots, right? And then, I've even seen it where in 504s and IEPs, there's just this specific language that points to violence and aggression. And that student could have just been clumsy, right? Like, they're 5, they're 6. And so we have to watch for those nuances and those little specific narrative creations that take place in report cards, in 504 plans and IEPs, right? And then just in the overall language of the teacher and the administration or the school about your child. Do not let anyone speak as if your child is a monster or a criminal. Okay, you can't even talk about my kids to me like that. I demand that tone be set. And any language that I have seen that leads to dehumanizing or thingifying my children, I have demanded that it be redacted, edited, and I need a formal copy of something saying I do not approve of this language in their file. And I've done that, right? And here's why. And so we have to be willing to do that. We have to be willing to really question what people are saying about and to our children, and what type of curriculum and other things are being offered that also reflect the goodness of our children, right? What they bring culturally good, their background and history and inventions and things that are beyond just the slave type of communication, right? Things that show that they are huge contributors to society, right? Beyond just forced contributors. So there's a lot that can be done. I think whatever, as a parent or community leader, you feel on your heart led to do, I say do, and keep doing and do it. Don't think an act is too small. And don't compare yourself. We can't compare ourselves. Like, you do what you're gifted and able to do, and do it every day.
Absolutely. Bernita's saying, our delegate in Detroit, Michigan, is saying, and once that label, right, once they label them, they make sure other teachers know. So those babies go into the next grade with a teacher who has preconceived notions about them. So there is just this, like, almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if everyone around you is saying, you're no good, well, so-and-so is no good, is your child even being given a chance? We should all be given a chance. Bernita, Ebony's on the line, Ebony Wilkins, and she's saying, yes, Bernita, so true. Thank you, Ebony. One of the first times being on air here. Thank you for that.
So let me tell you one way that you can shift that type of practice happening, demand your respect. What you can do is, if your kid is going from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade, before they even switch grades, you host a team with the 3rd and 4th grade teacher and the principal. Now, I want to talk about my child's strengths and weaknesses, and in advance, I want to know what you are prepared to do to educate my child, right? And I want you to hand over, the 3rd grade teacher to hand over the goodness that my child is going to contribute into this 4th grade class ecosystem, right? And so I've done that before, where we got 12 people in a meeting, and me, because I want to know what all of your function is with my child and what types of things you're going to do for my child in advance. And then I want you to listen to what the last teacher is saying about my child. And we're going to sit right here. And even if I have to do a formal resolution with the teachers and the admin, that these are the type of practices you're going to exercise around my child. And I've done it. Okay, so it can be done. Then that is what I want to do, because that is my warning, for one, about respect, and then my contribution to say, you have everything you need in advance. I'm here as a parent contributing more if that's necessary. And so let's work as a team. Now, if you continue to get denied meaningful and respected collaboration and you're not valued after that, you need to think about taking your child to an environment where they want to teach them.
That's one thing I would say. You touched on this earlier on, where oftentimes, and this is what school choice is about, school choice week, because oftentimes parents do not have a choice in where they go to school, because of the option outside of their public school is to go to a school that's charging tuition. Then they cannot afford it, and they're stuck with the school that's offered to them. And those schools, and I'm speaking about New York, that's what I know, are divided along real estate line. So once your zip code, you live in a certain zip code, that's it for you. There really are not options, especially in that K through 5 area, really K through 8. Once you get to high school, then you have more options. One of the things I would say is have a conversation and ask the teacher, what is your discipline policy, straight up? Because in a syllabus, when I create my syllabus, that is something that I share. This is the community I'm striving to build. This is how do you work with students? I like this term, with big personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Administrator I worked with previously said, no, we're not going to call them bad and the problem kids, like Bernita, who was saying, like these derogatory terms. They're students with big personalities. How do you handle that? What's your mindset? I think that having that conversation beforehand is very helpful, because then you are being aware of the standard and you're holding them to the standard, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
And it really just, if I can't get respect from a teacher, my child will not be in their class, bottom line. Okay. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it is that first initial thought of, what do you think when you see me? Because whatever you think about me when you see me, that's what you're going to think about my children. And that's what you're going to think about everybody else that resembles me. And so if I see that your bias is creating a type of behavior towards me,
mm-hmm.
I am not going to release my child to your care, who is going to internalize that and won't be able to externally defend themselves with an adult. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we have to take an evaluation and an assessment of what type of people are we willing to leave our children with. Mm-hmm. And if they can't respect you, then they shouldn't be able to educate your children, because they're not respecting them. I have to say that. And there's so much, that goes along with those expectations that are stemming from what people believe about us when they see us. Okay.
And be very wary of parents made educators that you kind of brush it off, like, especially when they're younger, like, mm-hmm. No big deal, like, they just getting into a little bit of trouble, but don't worry about it. We just sat him out. He sat by himself. We took him outside. Taking outside too much means missing classroom instruction. That turns into what they call an achievement gap, when really it's not so much of an achievement gap, it's more so of an opportunity gap. You're not in the room to access the opportunities that are offered, because your child is spending so much time in the hallway, in this one's office and that one's office, being talked to about this and that. There have to be better strategies in place. I want to read this excerpt from This is taken from the NPR. I
Mhm.
dropped the link in the chat. This was from 2014, and I bring it up because it's good to look back to see, well, what has changed and where are we going. Similarly to what we just did with Cindy Martin. You had 8 years. What did you do with the time you were
Right.
given? So now in 2014, NPR says, here's what the education data shows. Kids who are suspended or expelled from school are more likely to drop out, and those dropouts are more likely to end up with criminal records. There is a direct correlation there. In many places, school discipline pushes kids directly into the juvenile justice system. Take this for example. A school fight can end in an arrest for assault. A school fight. Who got into a fight when they were in school? I did. A school fight that
Yeah.
can end up getting you arrested. I've seen it because the police are there on the school. They're at the school. There's no court. They're right there. They're right there.
I see about the personalities, right? And this is something that's huge because I would go in and visit high schoolers, especially Black students in the Black Student Union. And, basically, they weren't granted opportunities of leadership, right? Like, how are you utilizing these big personalities and putting them into roles of leadership where they can naturally exercise their leadership abilities, and then learn as they do it? And you have to practice till you master in skill. Right. And so what I would do is allow them to take the lead, and show them how their leadership could be used in positive ways. And then also linking them with community organizations that can also help them have that healthy leadership building. It's a double benefit because then we get a skilled transfer of power as well. And you would be surprised what types of things the students would be able to take the lead on when they are placed in leadership roles, when they are allowed to have the transitions of power, right? When they are just allowed to say, here's an opportunity and we're going to trust you with it. But see, that's the thing, you got to trust them, right? Some students can't be still, right? Like, you got to understand that some of our kids they process as they move. Okay. They do. They're kinesthetic learners. My son touches on stuff all day. He got a big personality. And he will, push back if you try to make him sit for longer than 15 minutes. So I'm not going to even place him in the situation. And me and his math and science program have contracts that say, you know what, 15 minutes on, 10 minutes preferred activity, but then you got to give this much level of productivity. And this is what we expect, right? Because he learns around the clock. It's not just through a certain time frame. And so that has in turn given him the ability to wake up learning and to go to sleep learning, because we have trained him to constantly be learning in order to get his work done. Like, I don't want to be educated in a way that tells you to turn your brain off after a certain time. We have to be able to help our children and our high schoolers especially practice inductive and deductive reasoning, learn how to understand critical thinking,
critical analysis, rhetorical analysis. That all of these critical thinking skills that you're right are not developed because it's like, okay, be quiet. And I want to add this also because guess what? What's a big personality in a Black child that's a problem is seen as leadership potential in their white counterpart. And I have taught both demographics, and there is a very different approach to the way that white children are educated than to the way Black and brown children are. What it is allowed, white children are encouraged to speak up, talk up. You're an advocate to the team. That's what they're taught. where Black children are taught, be quiet. And the minute they start to express themselves, even if it's inappropriate, because guess what? It's school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that as a teacher. I mentioned on a show yesterday, I was called the R word yesterday. I've been called monkey. I've been called a lot of things by students, or you would say, what? They're still children, and it's a learning environment. It's an opportunity to learn. Take them in a breakout room. Talk about, this is why this was inappropriate. Let's get to the heart of it. Why did you say that? What was going on? There have to be some avenues where children can learn to grow and express themselves without everything being, you're out of here. The R word is retard, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's still a slur. And we're teaching culture. I don't want slurs of any kind being used in this environment, right?
You know, I gotta say this, Vivette,
Yeah.
because the fact that they can educate white children mean they can educate children. They just don't want to
Again,
educate
they
our
don't want to.
okay. And I worked in the for right out of high school. As I was going to college, I worked for the San Diego Unified School District that is now under scrutiny, and it was then. Let's talk about that, right? And so I worked in early childhood education with 32-year-olds in the classroom. You talking hardcore, right? I love those kids. Okay. So I worked early childhood education with the 2s and the 3s and the 4s, year olds. And we had a lot of them. And then my last 7 years, I spent in all special education, non-diploma bound place. And let me tell you something. I never called a parent unless a student was throwing up or had a fever and was sick. And the students that I worked with, I didn't have no problems with either. We're talking about levels of disability, right? It's in the all special education environment. We're talking about multiple modes of learning in that early childhood education environment, right? And so how much of the punishment practices are really driven by biases and narratives that are already created when you walk into the space and say, I want to work with kids? How much of a warning is said, well, you know what, if you got kids that do this and you have kids that, before you even get to know them, right? And so that is where I had just the multiple amounts of children that have been through my hands when I was in education, right? And I never called their parents because I could work it out with them. And I'm talking about 2-year-olds to 21-year-olds, okay?
And also, as you're working with parents, and I'm speaking now as both a parent, I started off the show saying I'm a parent and I am also a teacher. Have parents come for me? They absolutely have.
Of course.
Of course. But how I handle that is a matter of my level of professionalism. Okay? There has to be a standard of professionalism. Yes, parents, do they have the right to just pop off? No. But do we have to enter this with a measure of understanding? Look to see where they're coming from and learn to de-escalate. The police departments are not the only ones that do not know how to de-escalate. There need to be de-escalation processes, practices, trainings going on in the school. And I have not received any of these trainings from any school. This is me seeking out and just having sense, being a human. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Basic stuff. Talk people off the ledge. You mess with someone's child if they think you messed with them. They think you did. Remember that. They haven't heard everything yet. But as you said, their baby came home and told them something. They're ready. So now we have to know, in your email, what's your approach? When is it time to bring in an admin? What's your approach? How are you responding to that child? Do you know what's going on in the home? Do they trust you to tell you what's going on? There are a lot of variables and missing pieces, and I think we need to enter this with a different mindset, because Black children do not get the opportunity to be children. Things I see other little kids do, Black kids don't get the same option. They do it, and it's like, oh, kids just being kids, right?
And I
Black
gotta say that
kids,
this is a discussion that we have comfortably, but when we take it to the people and the places that it count, you can only have it up to a point, right?
oh,
Like me and you and everybody watching this show are comfortable having this conversation, are comfortable talking about what is absolutely necessary for our children to thrive in the educational spaces, but the conversation needs to be had in the spaces where they ain't comfortable having the conversation. And that's where the changes need to be mandated, right? And that's what the movement forward really needs to be. Because we already know we're allies, and we already know that we're going to do what is best to educate our children. But we also fund a public education system as taxpayers, right? Instead of being able to just sit there and continue to take things, we need to be able to say, I don't care if you're uncomfortable with this conversation because this level of discomfort is required in order to move forward. And until we have the uncomfortable conversation, and I'm not talking about the white fragility conversation, okay? Because that's a comfortable conversation too, like, oh, we did this and we did that. I'm talking about what actually needs to be dismantled and what actually needs to be in place to move forward, because they've proven that they can de-escalate white folks without shooting and killing them. Okay, they've proven that education can happen for white children without penalizing and criminalizing them, right, or their parents. So basically, you need to make America for all of its citizens, like I started out in this conversation, with the equal protection under the law and the non-discrimination types of situations that need to take place. And that's pretty much it.
that's it.
It's a lot.
Christina, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to everyone who joined in on this conversation. It was such a lively conversation, such a necessary one. I feel like we just needed this space to air things out and to get that level of education, get those words down, get some knowledge, get some articles under our belt. Walk in armed with that stuff. Walk in armed with it. If you'd like to continue being a part of this conversation, please, we invite you to stay connected with us via the National Parents Union. You are free to email Christina at npunion.org and also email myself, Vivette at npunion.org. Thank you to everyone who joined in tonight. Christina, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry if I held y'all over longer. I know y'all on the East Coast.
I don't think anybody even cared or minded because they were absolutely engaged. And this is knowledge worth knowing. Parents, let's band together. Our Black children need us. If not us, who?
Right.
If not now, when?
Right.
On that note, have a good night. Continue to speak your truth. Good night.
Good night.